In this lecture, we're going to learn about row string literals. And this is a technique we have in C++ to avoid ugly escape sequences like this, and I have this handled by the compiler. And the syntax we use is something like this. For example, we have our string here, which is called to-do list. We are going to use braced initialization here, so our initialization data is going to show up within these curly braces. And the syntax we use, we say or to say this is a row string literal. We put an opening double quote in here and we put a parenthesis. And after that, we're going to put whatever text we want and really format it however we want. We can put spaces, we can put tabs, we can move to the next line. We can do all kinds of crazy things. When our string is done, we're going to close it with a parenthesis followed by a double quote. And this is going to be interpreted by the C++ compiler as is. So the compiler is going to do the heavy lifting to format this without you going crazy looking at backslashes like this. And this is really cool. I use this all the time in my programs. We can even use this in assignments. For example, here we have to-do list 1 and we assign a row string literal. And this is going to work really cool as you are about to see in Visual Studio Code. It is also possible to do this with string literals. So here we have a const char pointer, which is really a C string. And we're going to initialize this guy with a row string literal. And it is exactly going to do what we expect. We can also use row string literals to fix the other escaped strings that we had. For example, we can fix our Windows path here. And you see that we don't have to escape this. It is exactly as we see it if we go and look at the path on our file system on Windows. And this is really cool. We can also do a row string literal for a Linux path here, but this is really not useful because we don't really need to escape this. If you go down, you see that our hint has also improved a bit because we don't have to put in thousands of backslashes to make sense of what we want to do. It is really easy to look at, and if you print this out, you're going to get what you expect. This is all cool and dandy, but we might have a problem if our string includes a double quote followed by a parenthesis or a parenthesis followed by a double quote, because these are the delimiters used by the C++ compiler to know the start and the end of our row string literal. So how do we solve this? The C++ designers solved this and they came up with a way we can really get around this problem. And that is using any sequence of characters. For example, here we have 3 dashes on the opening delimiter here, and we have 3 dashes on the closing delimiter here. Where do we exactly put this sequence of characters? We put that between our quote and parenthesis. For the opening delimiter here, it's going to go between the opening quote and the parenthesis. And for the closing delimiter here, it's going to go between the parenthesis and the quote. If you follow this convention, you can even put these guys in the message that you want to escape, and it is going to work exactly as you want. This is really all about row string literals. We are going to head over to Visual Studio Code and play with them. Okay, here we are in our working directory. The current project is row string literals. We're going to grab our template files and we're going to put them in our row string literals lecture. We are going to open this in Visual Studio Code pretty quick. Let's do that. We are going to include our string library. And first, we're going to show you the bad way to do things. And then we're going to see a good way we can do this using row string literals. Again, there is really nothing wrong per se with this, but it is ugly to look at. It is really hard to make sense of what all these backslashes are meaning in our string here. And sometimes it is better to just use row string literals. If we build this, we're going to see that it's going to work, no problem. It's going to do what we expect. The build is good. We can bring up our terminal here and clear and run roaster. And it is going to run. We are going to see the output here. We have our to-do list, which shows up exactly like we want. We have our tab characters in front of each message here. We have our Windows path And we have our hint, which does what we want. But this is really ugly to look at. You don't want to do things like this. A better way to do this is use row string literals, as we are about to see. So we're going to comment this out, and we are going to say std string and call this to-do list. And we're going to initialize this with a row string literal. A row string literal is going to start with an uppercase R. We're going to put our opening quote, we're going to put our parenthesis, and we're going to end this with a parenthesis and a closing double quote. And inside here, we can really put anything we want. So for example, we can put in our to-do list. We saw that we had clean the house, walk the dog, do laundry. So clean the house, we can say that. We can go to the next line and say walk the dog. We can go down again and say do laundry. And go down and say pick groceries. I think that's what we had in there. And this is our string. You see that we don't have to do any escaping. This is going to show up with these new line characters inside. So if we go down and print this out, let's say to do. Let's clear. We're going to build with GCC. The build is going to be good. You see, this is valid C++ syntax. We are going to clear and run Rooster. You're going to see that we have our to-do list here. Okay, we can add a tab here because I think we have a tab in front here. And we're going to build again. And we are going to clear and run Rooster. And now this is showing exactly as we want. So you can really use row string literals and you don't have to escape like we had here. You see, this is not readable and this is much more readable if you look at this in your code. And this is the use for row string literals, and make sure you use them if they make sense for whatever application you are designing. One thing you should get in the habit of doing is checking the standard where things were introduced in C++. For that, we're going to head over to our favorite search engine and say C++ row string literals. Okay, we're going to search for this. And we're going to look at the documentation from CPP reference and see what we get from there. If you go down here, you're going to see that row string literals, like we were doing in our code, were introduced in C++ 11. So if your compiler is not in C++ 11 or later mode, this thing is not going to work. And I just wanted you to be able to come and query for where the features you are using in C++ were introduced. So row string literals were introduced in C++ 11, and we are able to use them in our code because we are compiling in C++ 20 mode, which happens to be newer than C++ 11. Row string literals also work in assignments, and we're going to see an example of this. So let's comment this out. And we can say std string and say to-do list and say equals and put our row string literal on the right here. And it is going to be assigned to our to-do list string here. So we can also print this out. Let's go down and do that. Okay, if we build this, the build is going to go through, at least I hope. So let's do that. We're going to use GCC. The build is good. We can clear and run Rooster, and we're going to see our text printed out here exactly as we want. We can also use this with C strings, and all we really need to do is copy this. We don't need to do any crazy thing. We can copy this, go down, and change this to use a C string. And the way we can do that, we can say const char pointer and say C string like this. And we're going to use braced initializer here, and we're going to put the closing one at the end. We can change our thing to be like this, and you see it's going to be valid C++ code. And now what we want to print is our C string here. And it is going to work. Let's try and build this with GCC like we always do. The build is going to be good. We're going to clear, run Rooster, and we're going to have exactly what we expect here. Let's comment this out and show you that we can even fix the other things that we had in here. For example, the Windows path, the hint here, and also use row string literals. We can do that. And we're going to put the code to do this here. We have row string literals for the Windows path, the Linux path, all the hint here. And you see that now it really is easy to read and look at. If we build, we're going to get it work correctly, but before we do that, let's say what we are doing here. Now we are going to build with GCC. The build is going to go through, we can clear and run Rooster, and we see our things printed out here, and this is exactly what we want. What I want you to focus on right now is problematic row string literals. And what do I mean by that? Suppose you have a string like this, and it is an innocent row string literal, but inside we happen to have our delimiters in here. For example, we have the opening quote and the parentheses here. You see it is also here inside, and we also have a closing parenthesis and the double quote, and you see we have that here. And this is going to be a problem because the C++ compiler actually looks at these guys, the quotes and parentheses, to note the start and the end of our row string literal. And we need a way out of this. But before I show you a solution, if we try to build this, we're going to get a weird compiler error. And it's going to be ugly. Missing terminating character, std string. It's really not clear what the problem is. But we can try and fix this. And C++ provides a way to solve this by putting any sequence of characters that you want to really make your delimiters unique. For example, we can come in front here and go between the quote and the parentheses. And for example, we can put in 3-star characters. Once we do that and go to the end and put 3-star characters, now C++ is going to be happy because it knows now this is the start of our row string literal and this is the end of our row string literal. Visual Studio Code hasn't picked on this yet, but if we try to build, now you're going to see that the build is good and the squiggly lines are gone. So you don't really have to use these sequences that I used here. You can really use anything, but it has to be the same thing at the start and at the end here. So for example, I can delete this guy and say Daniel, my name, get quiet. I can say that and go to the end here and say Daniel, get quiet. And it is going to work if I try to build again. Again, build is good, and we can print this out. So let's go to the next line and print this. So we're going to say stdc out, and we're going to build with GCC. The build is going to be good as you see down here, and we can clear and run Rooster. We're going to see our message here, and you see that we have our quotes and parentheses as part of our message here. And this is how you can do this. But don't really use something ugly and long like this. I think just using dashes or stars or really something not large is good enough. So let's use the dashes here. We're going to build again. The build is going to be good. We're going to clear and run Rooster, and you see our message down here. And this is exactly what we expect. This is really all we set out to do in this lecture, learning about row string literals and different ways you can use them, and a few problems you need to be aware of. We are going to stop here in this lecture. In the next one, we're going to see how copied strings can be really bad for your performance. Go ahead and finish up here and meet me there.